Well, just then following on from that, given you've got this, I like to think of you guys as a kind of a tribe of benign megalomaniacs, kind of which is great. And but out of that, then what are the are there laws? Are there things that anthropologists now have discovered that we can say, well, or tendencies, at least strong tendencies about the world and civilizations and things that we can now identify and say, yeah, well, this seems to be the case. What has this method brought about at that level?
Well, this is at the heart of a lot of what I've been doing recently. When I learnt history at Oxford, and when I learnt anthropology at the LSE, the thing that was drummed into me is that there are no laws. You cannot generalize. Anthropology and history are arts and humanities subjects which are particularizing. They will describe in amusing or interesting detail particular cases, but you can't generalize from the particular to the general. There was a big reaction against people like Arnold Toynbee and Spengler and people who tried to make deep laws in history, and even the Victorian anthropologists who tried to make laws in anthropology. We study cases, and each is different. And so this was drummed into me again and again and again. So what is true of Henry II's world is not true of Victorian England, let alone Victorian France. Now, when I came to look back on my life in my early 60s, and I came to think about writing a set of letters to my granddaughter Lily, encouraged by Jerry Martin, I sat down to say, well, what can I tell Lily that I've discovered as a historian and anthropologist over 40 years? I suddenly realized that I discovered nothing. There were no laws. I couldn't say to Lily, if you do this, that will happen. There was no law that in every society you will have a god, because anthropologists showed that there were places where there were no gods. There was no law that every human society will have marriage, because there were societies without marriage. There was no law that incest is always prohibited, which was used to be thought of as universal, because there are places where you have to marry your brother, ancient Egypt and so on. So there's no laws in anthropology. And same in history. History does not repeat itself, as famously stated. History teaches us nothing, except that history teaches us nothing. It's a tale told by fools and idiots, etc. Now, this is a dispiriting thing to tell your granddaughter. And you wonder what the hell you've been doing for 40 years. So I thought about it a bit more, and I thought, well, is there a way out? And then I remembered Acton's famous dictum, the most surprising, the best known aphorism in the English language, if you ask people, in intellectuals anyway. Acton's dictum: all power tends to corrupt. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Now, the key word in that is tends. What Acton was saying that usually, and he gives examples, usually power will corrupt you, but not always, unless you have a circular argument in that absolute power will corrupt you because it's absolute. And I then also thought of another example, which was Malthus, his movement from the first to the second edition, where he said, in the first one, there are laws of population. Population will always outstrip resources. And then in the second edition, he said, no, this is a tendency. Won't always happen. But it is in some ways like Weber's models or ideal types. It is what you would expect. Weber is talking about tendencies, probably in a very high proportion of cases. I then learned more about how sciences worked through my interviews. And certainly once you encounter quantum mechanics and so on, you realize that scientists don't work in a world of laws. The uncertainty principle and other things in modern physics show that there are no laws in physics. There are probabilities and tendencies and likelihoods, but exceptions lead you into new situations. So in philosophy and physics, they were realizing that things are not absolute, that God does play with dice, as so it seems. And then I read a bit more about philosophy, like Collingwood's philosophy on history, and above all, John Stuart Mill in his Logic of the Social Sciences. And Mill said that one of the great things in being a social scientist is to try and find middle level predictive tendencies, not absolute laws at the highest level and not minute things, but things which are normally give us some grasp on the future. They almost always happen, and then, so it's again like Sherlock Holmes. This is normally how people behave, and these produce all the useful things that human beings know about the world. And then it dawned on me that of course this is true, because how would it be that you were sitting there, Richard, interviewing me on a Sunday morning, unless we said there is a tendency for a computer, when you turn it on, to come up, and there is a tendency for our friend Zilan Wang to remember at 10 o'clock to set up a Zoom thing, as she has done in the past. And there is a tendency for Alan to go on talking interminably. These are tendencies. Now, it may be that Alan will stop short, or that Zilan will forget, or now every part of our life, when we drive along a crowded road, we assume millions of tendencies. Cars tends to keep on the right side of the left-hand side of the road, and so on and so on and so on. We couldn't wake up in the morning and move for a second without built-in views on tendencies. Now, how do you find these tendencies? Well, John Stuart Mill said there are two ways, and I think I've mentioned this. Basically, you find them out through psychology. You find out who you are as a human and what humans do and what they are. So human nature, this is, given, and this was a point made by Mill, if people are very big, tough people, they may tend to bully people, at schools. It wasn't the weedy little ones who were the bullies, it was the big, strong ones. That's a tendency, but not all big, strong boys are bullies. And that's true. If you are given some money before you enter politics, that may have a tendency to corrupt you, but it doesn't always do, and so on and so on. So through knowledge of human nature, and the other is through history, because although the past doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes, as the statement Mark Twain or whoever said. Basically, there is a pattern. There is a pattern to the past. And so if you want to understand how the world is now, you look back. The more you understand, and that is the justification for history, the more you understand how it's got to where it is now, the more you may be able to guess a little bit into the future. Now, it's like weather forecasting. You can guess quite accurately a day or a week or on past tendencies. Once you get into a few months or years, it becomes more and more just probabilistic. And so history and psychology, and to me, anthropology, provided me with tools for understanding myself in time and space so that I could predict the future and I could come to terms with the present. Because as I look around, particularly young people, and as I look at, the media now, what is very striking is how temporocentric and ill-educated people are. And they take each new crisis as, as if it had never happened before. I gave a talk the other day to 3 or 4 young Oxford DPhil students who are starting a new journal. of religion. And they said, what? I said, what do you want me to talk about? And they said, the present crisis in religion and theology. And I said, what if I start off by saying there is no crisis? And my talk actually was saying, you know, when I look at my letters, the crisis when I was at Oxford in 1962-63 with the Cuba missile crisis and China invading India and this and that, we had our crisis too. And you tend to get locked into feeling that each situation is unparalleled. And therefore, you can easily be swept away by despair or despondency. But if you understand the deeper movement, and this is in another way is similar to what I was talking about with Brodel, if you understand the deep currents of history, and then the middle tides, and then the waves at the top, you understand each in relation to the other. And the tendencies which I isolated, and my book, Letters to Lily, describes 30 tendencies, 30 answers. Bureaucracy. Bureaucracy tends to expand. This is Parkinson's law. You know, if you have a bureaucrat, the bureaucrat wants bureaucrats below them, so they create more bureaucrats. So hospitals, schools, institutions, there is a virus of bureaucracy. Bureaucracy tends to expand until someone stops it. That's built into the system. And this is true of many different things. Wars tend to proliferate, diseases tend to expand. But you can, once you understand the tendencies, that's when you can take some action against them if you want to. And also you feel more in control of your world. So the pursuit of anthropology and history for me has been trying to understand myself and try to understand the world so that I can see the deeper tendencies which govern my life. And I don't feel so helpless and alone, and I can talk to other people.